Hi, thank you for joining us today, April 28th, 2016, for the Harvard Alumni Association webinar, Returning to Work After a Career Break, Strategies and Success Stories, featuring Carol Fishman-Cohen, Harvard MBA 85. Carol is the CEO of iRelaunch and a leading expert on career reentry. She has presented on career reentry strategy more than 200 times to combined audiences of over 16,000. Carol consults to some of the world's largest corporations on career reentry strategy and programming. Her seminal Harvard Business Review article, The 40-Year-Old Intern, and her TED Talk, How to Get Back to Work After a Career Break, focus on the use of internship as a vehicle for employers to engage with experienced professionals returning from career break. Facilitating our conversation is Matthew Temple, Harvard College class of 1986. Matthew is the Director of Alumni Career and Professional Development for the Kellogg School of Management, where he manages a team of people who deliver career and executive coaching, workshops, and webinars to 50,000 alumni globally. He has coached executives in many industries, including consulting, entertainment and media, financial services, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, and technology. Before I hand the mic over to Matthew and Carol, I'll cover a few webinar housekeeping details. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with a link to it next week. Webinar attendees are muted. We encourage you to submit questions and to use the Q&A function on the webinar screen. Finally, following this webinar, you will receive a brief survey, and we hope that you will take a moment to let us know how we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for hosting us today. And I wanted to just launch right in. Carol, I know that you've advised and spoken with and inspired thousands of relaunchers. What is the biggest challenge people face when they want to return to work?
So thank you for asking that question, Matthew. Right before I dive in, I just want to mention that for men who might be on the line as well as women, and for men and women who have taken career breaks that have nothing to do with childcare, the strategies and the discussion that we're going to have today is equally relevant for people in all of those situations. So going into this question about the biggest challenge people face when they want to return to work, it really is figuring out exactly what you want to do. It sounds so obvious, but when people are getting ready to return to work, they sometimes want to dive right into setting up their resume or creating a LinkedIn profile. That's something we can talk about later, but or even practicing interview strategy. But none of that can really occur in a way that's going to be helpful for you until you figure out, have my interests and skills changed or have not changed while I have been on career break? And the longer you've been out, the more important this is, because if you think about it, sometimes we just fall into careers, right? We fall into some major in college, we fall into some job right when we graduate, and if we take a second job in the same field, the next thing you know, we have a career. And then we're just completely focused on that career for years, and the career break can sometimes be a gift because it's the first time we allow ourselves to step back and reflect on whether we were even on the right career path to begin with. And some of us find that we were fulfilling someone else's expectations, or we fell into something without a lot of thinking, and we want to relaunch our careers in an entirely different direction in a way that we think is more true to our interests and skills. Other people are very fortunate and find that they were on exactly the right career path to begin with, and they may relaunch in something very closely related to what they were doing pre-career break. And then there are some people who are in a situation where they loved what they were doing before, but there's something about that prior job. Maybe it was 50% travel or 24/7 accountability that they feel is not compatible with their current life stage. So they might relaunch into something that's related to what they were doing before, but not exactly the same thing. So this whole process is really a career assessment process, and it involves reflection and deliberation, and also potentially using some of the tools that are out there for career assessment that you might be able to access through your Alumni Career Services Department. But at any rate, however you approach it, it takes time. So that's something to think about, especially those of you who are on career break and a little earlier in the process. It's good you're thinking about it right now because it will take time to go through this process. And for those of you who are further along or maybe feeling a sense of urgency about returning because you went through a divorce or you have spousal death or disability or some immediate financial need, you might need to take a less than perfect job to pay the bills right away while you're strategizing for that next move, which is going to be your true relaunch.
Thank you. And I know a lot of times when we're coaching alumni, we'll often tell them, one assessment that's very helpful is Career Leader to help people think through interests and values. I think values are very important because values may change at different inflection points. So for instance, that for some relaunchers, I would imagine lifestyle may be a bigger value than it might have been 10 or 15 years ago.
I happen to love Career Leader myself. And also what you're saying about that values exercise makes me think about an overlay that we use at iRelaunch on top of the career assessment process. So we look at career assessment in terms of a job building blocks process where we look at each prior significant work and volunteer experience and divide those experiences into components and then identify which of those components you love the most and are best at and extract them. And if you do that for each of your significant prior work and volunteer experiences, you will end up with a pile of these extracted components and you can build back up a new career path for yourself, either by yourself or with a group of trusted friends or with a coach or maybe in a group coaching environment. But overlaid on top of that is what we call the 3 C's, which are control, content, and compensation. So control is really control over your time. What are your schedule demands right now? Like, do you want to train for a marathon? Do you want a job that is a full-time job but has some room around the edges for you to do something that's meaningful to you, such as marathon training? Do you need to check out in the middle of the afternoon and meet a school bus because you have school-age kids and then resume working later? Or do you want to have reduced hours during the summer? I mean, this is very unique in terms of control, what that scheduling means for each person. Content is what you do on the job and by extension, the people with whom you work. And then there's compensation. Am I going to get paid fairly or what I'm worth for the work that I do? And the key thing to keep in mind about these 3 C's is that you shouldn't have to trade more than 1 C to get back on the career track, and you shouldn't have to trade that compensation C forever. So we've seen people trade compensation for control. Maybe they are willing to take less money than they think is fair or that they're worth in order to get the schedule that they want. But then as their life stage changes, we've seen people make up that compensation piece over time. Either they through raises and promotions, or they have a business that becomes successful, or maybe they start consulting and they end up with a full-time job with one of their clients. So that whole values piece and this 3 C's piece is an overlay on top of the actual career assessment interests and skills piece.
Thank you. And what's interesting, I know another challenge that comes up, and I really first heard about it when I first met you 10 years ago, is the confidence piece. And the very first time we did programming for people re-entering the workforce, I wasn't aware of how big of an issue it is. Could you talk a little bit about confidence, particularly for people who are re-entering the workforce?
Right. Yeah. And so I, of course, started in this whole relaunched business because I returned to work myself after being out of the full-time workforce for 11 years. And I certainly experienced that confidence piece directly. And I have to say, we've seen it experienced almost universally for people who have been on career break for a long period, no matter how senior or accomplished they were before they took their career break. The further away you get from your professional identity, it seems to equate with a diminished sense of self for some people in terms of when they start thinking about their lives and their value in terms of what they can contribute in the workplace. That's where the confidence piece sort of comes in. So there are a couple of confidence building strategies I can share with you right now. And, you know, a lot of it has to do with getting back in touch with people from the past, people with whom you went to school or with whom you worked, and then the kinds of conversations that you have with them once you get back in touch. So we found that people from your past, people with whom you went to school or worked, have what we call a frozen in time view of you. So even if your sense of self has diminished over time, those people from the past remember you as you were, and they don't really know anything about, you know, what's been going on during your career break or how you've been feeling about yourself during that period. So when you get back in touch with people from the past, and I will say here that includes going to your reunions, even if you feel like you don't have anything to report because you've been on career break. What you have to report is that you've been on career break and you're very excited about going back to work. And I'll tell you some more dialogue to have with people in just a minute. But it's important to get back in touch with these people from the past because you'll hear their enthusiasm about your interest in returning to work, and that will be the beginnings of confidence boosting for yourself. And then the other piece is you have to get good at talking about yourself. Some people call this the elevator story or the elevator pitch, but talking about your background and talking about what you're interested in doing. And of course, that interested in doing piece has to do with the thorough career assessment that I talked about earlier. But when you first start talking about yourself, you might not sound that good because you really need to practice. And you need to practice out loud. You can't just think in your head what you might say when you're in a conversation with someone who asks you, what are you doing right now? You have to practice out loud in front of a mirror. Or with another person in a mock interview situation. And it's almost as if you have to memorize it. There's a great book out right now called Work Rules by Laszlo Bock, who's the head of people operations for Google. And he talks about when he was in his own interview process that he memorized anecdotes from his prior work experience and what he was going to say when he talked about himself like a script, like it was a theater performance. And that's what I'd recommend, that you practice it over and over again as if it's a script. And first you talk with what we call non-judgmental friends and family, your close circle of people who are going to be supportive, and listen to how they respond when you describe your background and what you're interested in doing. They might have a better phrase or just a better way of saying what you're trying to express, and then you can include that the next time around. And once you've had those conversations with your inner circle, you'll start to sound better. You'll gradually start to feel a little more confident. Then you can speak with people that you know less well. Then you can ultimately move into professional situations, like maybe you go to a professional association meeting. And Matthew, maybe we should remember to say, I have some dialogue and ideas about what people could say in that situation, and then ultimately the interview itself. So essentially what you're doing is you're having interview practice every time you have one of these conversations, and the more you have, the better you'll sound and the more confident you'll feel.
So following up on that, Carol, what exactly should I say when reaching out to people about returning to work? Are there any particular thoughts that work more effectively?
So we say first of all, LinkedIn can be a gift to people who are on career break because it helps you locate all of those long-lost people from the past that you might have lost track of, and that you can go to LinkedIn Learning webinars to learn how to set up on LinkedIn and use it in your job search, so I won't go into that right now, but you can reach out to someone, ask them to connect with you on LinkedIn. It's just like asking someone to friend you on Facebook. If they accept, which they most likely will if they remember you from the past, even if you think they won't, they probably will, then you'll have their contact information, and then you can send them an email, and it should be something along the lines of, it's great to connect again. I've been out of the workforce for the last 10 years, and I'm in information gathering mode. So in the first sentence, you want to establish right away, whether you're speaking with someone or you're doing this through email, that you are in information gathering mode. You're expressing that you're trying to take time to reflect and really think hard about where you add the most where you can add the most value to an employer. And part of that process is that you want to know if you could speak with this person and would they walk you through some of the changes in the industry that have happened over the last 10 years. Ask if you can call them and speak to them on the phone for 15 or 20 minutes. Keep it short. Or ask if they would walk you through some of the decisions that they made for their own career path, and that would help inform your own decision-making process. So you're reestablishing relationships with people on the basis of something that has nothing to do with them getting a job for you. You're in information gathering mode, and that's really important. And one other piece of that is we recommend people getting involved with their professional associations in an event planning mode, because then you can connect with people in your field because you're asking them to speak or recommend other speakers or recommend some kind of a programming format. Again, you're building a relationship with them that is not based on anything opportunistic. It has nothing to do with your job search. And then later, after these conversations have happened, you would potentially be in a position to ask them for some recommendations that are more closely related to, can you help me get a job? But you certainly don't want to lead with that. And this information gathering mode messaging is very helpful in having those first conversations.
And in addition to getting involved in professional associations, I think alumni associations as well are just a great way to get back in, particularly in terms of meeting a lot of people, helping to plan events as a way to get back in.
Yeah, good point.
One of the probably most common questions that I'm asked is, how do you respond when asked about the gap in your resume during an interview? And I think for a lot of people re-entering, it really gives them great pause. Any thoughts about that?
Yes. So first of all, ideally, that interview is going to be the second point of contact that the person has with you or your resume. The first point would be a personal handoff. So I just want to caution people against this idea that, you know, you submit 100 resumes online and you don't hear anything. That's very typical, even for people who don't take career breaks, but especially for people who take career breaks, to not get any response at all and then feel defeated because you've gone through that process. So don't assign any significance to that. Ideally, you need to go out of the house, and we should also make some a note to talk later about where exactly to go to at the starting point, because one of our strategies is get out of the house. You cannot conduct your relaunch run sitting behind your computer researching companies online and applying. But let's say you're successful and you do get to the interview point and you're in like a second interview. So it's not even the person you had the personal handoff to, it's someone else at the employer, and they're really fixated on that career break, and they say, gosh, I see you took an 8-year career break here. Tell me about that. And you can say, yes, I took a career break to care for my children, and now I can't wait to get back to work. In fact, the reason I am so excited about this particular position is when I worked at Xerox, we faced very similar customer challenges. Let me tell you about one of them. So you see, what I'm saying here is, you acknowledge that you took a career break. You do not apologize for it, but it's very brief. You just say, yes, I took a career break, and now I can't wait to get back to work, and here's why I'm the best person for the job. And this, again, plays into that whole recommendation about having a prepared anecdote from each of your prior significant work and volunteer experiences. It could be volunteer experiences too, but having some detailed situation in your back pocket for a whole range of experiences that you can rely on during the course of the interview in the answer when you're answering questions like this. And if there's anyone who's on the call who's very early in their career, who hasn't taken their career break yet but is anticipating one of the things that you can do for yourself that would be incredibly helpful is to document. Right now, set up a file, electronic file for yourself, and put notes in there every time you have an interesting or significant or an achievement or something that in your work experience, because you're not going to remember it years later. And if you have notes about this, it'll be much easier to construct these anecdotes that you're going to want to use post-career break if you take one.
Carol, you talked a little bit about getting outside of the house when you're reentering. Any thoughts about what are the best places to go when you're starting to have those conversations and meeting with people?
Okay, so I did mention reunions, which is great, but also as a good starting point, I've had more relaunchers, we call them relaunchers, people returning to work after a career break, more relaunchers swear by Toastmasters. So Toastmasters, of course, is that organization where people are working on their public speaking skills. It's relatively inexpensive. It's about $45 every 6 months. They have chapters everywhere, even internationally, if there are people who are on the line from outside the U.S. And they usually meet every other week. And most of the people are working. And it's supposed to be a very friendly, supportive group because everyone has this mutual goal of trying to improve public speaking. And that's just a great way to get in there and start having these conversations where you can practice talking about yourself. Another great resource is the University Lecture Series. So if you are living right here near Harvard, in the Cambridge area, or anywhere in the country, even outside the country, most of us are living somewhere near a college or university. Most of them have some sort of lecture series, and many of them have like numerous lecture series on different topics. That's another great one to go to when you're first starting out. You can just go and talk to the person sitting next to you, because the other people that might be attracted to whoever is speaking could be someone who is in your field. If you want to meet the speaker or the panelists, you want to make sure you go early because it's much easier to catch them and get them in a substantive conversation if they're just setting up than afterward where they're like surrounded by a big crowd of people. But those are two places I would recommend that are good starting points to sort of get you in the habit of having these conversations. Now, let me interject at this point about going to professional association events. So 2 points. First of all, some of these professional association multi-day conferences are really expensive. They could be like a couple $1,000s. So that's another opportunity where you could ask your professional association if you can volunteer at their conference. Maybe you'd be a speaker host for a day. Maybe you handle a certain panel. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing to think about is to get really updated in your field. And this actually starts to creep into the ageism topic. But one of the things that we recommend to people to combat ageism, but also to just enable conversations when you get into professional associations or meetings or other conversations where you're interacting with people in your field, is to get really up to date on what's going on in the field. So one great question to ask people from the past when you're getting back in touch with people you worked with is, what publications do you think are the best ones? What blogs, what websites, what publications do you think are the best ones to read about our industry and the current thinking? So that's one thing for people from the past. But then once you get those recommendations, you want to read the latest articles. You want to read the book of or articles of the person who's speaking, if that's what the event is. So when you go into a professional association event, you could say, did you read the last article about Guru X, from Guru X in the field that was pretty controversial about the topic tonight? Or, oh yeah, I just read the speaker's book and this is what I thought. Or I read his very first book. But but to have these conversations about content in the field is much more interesting and a much better sort of icebreaker in the conversation than to try to make small talk or have the conversation wander to, you know, why you've been out of the workforce for the last 6 years. And I guess as long as I sort of started to touch on this ageism piece, we really feel like having that kind of preparation in terms of knowing all the current thinking in your field and being really up on what people are thinking and writing to all the experts in the field, that allows you to come into these events with an energy and enthusiasm and a real content command that is going to help people overlook any biases that they might have. Maybe not all of them, and maybe not for every person, but for a lot of people who might have biases. If you come bounding in, you know, with excitement and enthusiasm, and you are up to speed in your field, that can overcome a lot of perceptions.
What if people haven't really done anything during their career break to prepare themselves for their return? Are they doomed?
I'm very glad you asked this, because people sometimes panic because they think, wait a minute, I took a career break because I was taking care of my elderly mother-in-law, or because I have 3 little kids at home, and I wasn't on career break so I could be prepping for what I was going to do when I returned. And I was in that position myself. In fact, the early years when I was home with my kids, I really felt so professionally disconnected. I barely even read the newspaper. And I remember when I was in year 9 of my career break, I was trying to figure out how in the world I was ever going to get back in. But one of the things I started thinking about was that I hadn't read the newspaper in a really long time in any real way. And especially, I hadn't read the Wall Street Journal. I have a finance background. I didn't even know what financial instruments were being used, what the acronyms were. I didn't even know what companies existed, because there had been so much consolidation in the industry and mergers and bankruptcies. So, you know, I feel like you can always start, even if you haven't been doing anything for a long period of time. And some of these strategies that we're talking about in terms of getting up to speed, in terms of taking a strategic volunteering role, that's something that we'll probably talk about in a little bit, taking on volunteer roles in line with your career goals. So, you know, maybe you're doing a volunteer work in your school or community, and you're heading up a major fundraiser, which is great, but your target career area is in something unrelated to that. You're going to need to start to be less. You need to A, say no, and B, to the existing volunteer opportunities when they come around and ask you again, and B, you are going to need to seek out volunteer roles that are in line with your career goals, and we can talk about some examples of that in a little bit. So that's something to think about. Maybe enrolling in a certificate program. These certificate programs are semester or year-long programs that are on very specific topics, like managing a political campaign, or landscape architecture, or fundraising and development. And they're great signaling to employers that you have an interest in a particular area. So all of those things, if you haven't done anything during your career break, you could sign up for a certificate program and start a volunteering opportunity relevant to your career goals, and start reading up in your field all at the same time, and that would still be okay. You're going to have to give yourself a little time to do those things, but they're immediately, you can put them on your resume and talk about them even if you haven't completed them. So don't panic, and you're absolutely not doomed if you're in that situation.
What if I find myself interested in roles that the employer may consider me overqualified for? How do I handle that?
Okay, so that also is, some people see that as a, being called overqualified is a veiled like way of saying that there's some sort of ageism going on. But what we think employers don't realize, and I actually recently wrote a Harvard Business Review article about this, 5 reasons why people take lower comp, lower pay when they return to work, is because there are sometimes we are targeting opportunities for ourselves that might be perceived by others that we're overqualified for, but it's exactly perfect for us for our life stage right now. So maybe we're one of those people who had a job before that required traveling on a moment's notice or lots of travel, and we're perfectly happy taking a role that is lower compensated because it doesn't have those demands, but it's more compatible with our life stage. Or maybe we've been out of the workforce for a really long time and we intentionally target a more junior role to get our feet wet again before ultimately moving up a few years later. Maybe we simply want a less stressful job. You know, we want a job where we can deliver excellent results to our employer and manage our life outside of work. And then there are those of us who we're not on the right career path to begin with, and we want to relaunch our career in an entirely new direction, and maybe we need to take more of an entry-level role. So all of those are intentional reasons why we might be targeting a role that could be perceived that we're overqualified for. So the answer would be, so if someone in an interview says, wow, you seem really overqualified for this position, the response would be, I understand how it would appear that I seem overqualified for it, but I intentionally sought this position out because at my current life stage, one of my priorities is to deliver excellent results to my employer and manage my life outside of work. And that's why I picked this role, because I think that I can accomplish both goals at this particular level. Now, for some hiring managers, they will not buy that, and they're still, you know, not going to accept you. Others won't have understood it in that way, and once we've explained that to employers, we're trying to get more of a recognition among employers that this is an intentional choice that people make, so it's not going to be such a surprise to them when they hear this, and some of them will be hearing it for the first time and accept it.
And to your point, Carol, I was actually in the position a few years ago of hiring an assistant who was very overqualified for the role I was looking to hire. Her earnings were already above what we were able to pay, and she'd been in a much more demanding role at a consulting firm. And it was interesting then interviewing her because one of the reasons the role was appealing for her was, one, working at a university, two, she had 2 young children, 3, her commute was going to be cut down to 5 minutes. That helped convince me that it was the right fit. And probably the hardest working, best assistant I ever could have asked for. We had her for 4 years, and then we're her biggest backers to get her promoted into a higher role within the university because she'd been such an outstanding performer.
That's a great story.
And one other interesting comment that I've heard about the charge about being overqualified. We've had a workshop in the past, and the presenter was Abby Kohut, who has a book called Absolutely Abby. And I think this is the best response I think I've ever heard to the overqualified question. And she said, if someone asks you that question, she said, my response is, if you were taking a flight from Boston to Chicago, would you want a qualified pilot, or would you want maybe an overqualified pilot, like a Sully Sullenberger, who's going to fly you to Chicago? And I thought, best answer I'd ever heard.
I love that answer. Very good.
So another question that came in was about comments or thoughts about temp work as a vehicle to return. What do you see as the pros and cons of something like that?
So we're actually huge proponents of temp work because it fulfills the same role that an internship or a contract role or a special assignment or covering maternity leave fulfills. It gets you in the door and you become a known quantity. So we tell people not to shy away from temp work, even mundane temp work. One of my favorite quotes was in the Wall Street Journal a few years ago. It was in an article where they were talking about Amazon ramping up its seasonal hires for the holiday season. They're going to hire like 70,000 people for the holiday season, and the spokesperson said, we hire temp workers to identify strong talent and manage our seasonal hiring needs. And I thought it was interesting to hear them articulate that, but that's exactly what happens when people are in these temp roles. And this question sort of rolls into this whole idea of internships and internship-like experiences as a way for people who are on career break to return to work and as a way for employers to engage with this population. And this is a topic that I have been on a mission about since probably 2010 when I first noticed the use of internships and internship-like experiences as a way for employers to engage with people returning from career break. I wrote an article about it for Harvard Business Review magazine called The 40-Year-Old Intern, and actually the TED Talk that Anne referred to initially talks extensively about this. But when we're talking to employers who might view hiring someone who is coming off of a career break as a high-risk proposition, we talk to them about how the internship or internship-like experiences lowers the perceived risk because it allows them to base their hiring decision on an actual work sample, and they don't need to make that hiring decision until the internship period is over. So we've actually had employers say, I wish I could hire everyone this way. And the other piece of it is that this concept, we think, is sort of the beginning of a bigger idea where if you could use internships to successfully engage with large numbers of people returning to work after a career break, then you can use that internship-like experience to reconnect with a whole range of non-traditional career transitioners, whether they're veterans or military spouses or retirees or expats. We think, and we're working to make it the beginning of a way that companies engage with all these populations. And the other thing that we're talking to employers about is, you know, for employers that have well-established internship programs for their entry-level employees, there's no reason why they can't have a side-by-side reentry internship program. A lot of the same employee classification is used. Some of the same modules for their orientation and their internship are the same. So that's where we're going when we're talking with companies about establishing formal reentry internship programs, but they're still, as you know, the numbers that we're starting with are still very small relative to the whole, you know, world of companies or employers. So if you are in a situation where you think you're in, let's say you're in an interview and the interviewer says to you, well, I think you're a great candidate, but there's no way I'm going to be able to convince my colleagues once they see that you've had a 9-year career break. So that's your cue to say, I understand that your colleagues might be concerned about hiring me because of my career break. Would you consider bringing me on for a special project or covering a maternity leave or a temp role? And that way you would be able to evaluate me based on actual work that I do, and you wouldn't have to make that hiring decision until the internship period is over. So again, there are some managers who will dismiss that out of hand. There will be others who will have never thought about it before, and it might be an interesting way for them to present you as a candidate to their colleagues to say, let's test this out. It's a testing out period. And remember, it is a two-way street to a certain degree because it allows you also to evaluate, do I like the people? Do I like the work? Do I like, you know, what this employer stands for and how they go about getting the work done? So that's what I think about temp work and the extension internships and internship-like experiences.
And interesting, a lot of times I'll coach candidates about the language they're using because internship could be maybe a little intimidating to companies because their response might be, well, we don't have a formal internship process. But then using, you know, just like you said, projects sounds a little easier. Well, sure, we'll hire people to do projects. So sometimes just language can be important if they don't have an internship program in place.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because you absolutely do not have to call it an internship. Special project, contract consulting role are, you know, other ways that you can describe pretty much the same thing.
But following up, you know, we were talking about that we are starting to see more internship programs starting at some employers. Can you speak to us about some of the programs that you've seen, and are the programs typically open to both men and women?
So first of all, the programs are absolutely open to both men and women. We usually see men apply for and participate in these programs at the same rates that they are in the pool to begin with. So the best data that I have on those percentages is our own. iRelaunch runs a return to work conference that we've now run 18 times, and we've had over 4,500 people come. And so we take a lot of data from this group, and typically they're 93% female. So we've seen the applicant pools for these formal internship programs reflect numbers that are close to that. However, it is really important to note that men are absolutely eligible to apply for and participate in these programs. Now, interestingly, Wall Street is really a leader in terms of an industry embrace of these formal programs, which are paid internships that range from 10 to 18 weeks, depending on the company. And they become pretty competitive to get into. Goldman Sachs was the first one to offer the program in 2008, a formal reentry internship program for returning finance professionals. Sara Lee also offered a program in that first year, but Sara Lee has since been completely restructured and doesn't even exist as Sara Lee anymore, and so that program went away. But I just wanted to note them as also being one of the first. And then in the 2013-14 timeframe, Credit Suisse, MetLife, JP Morgan, and Morgan Stanley added their reentry internship programs. So that's when we considered we had 5 major programs in financial services, a real industry embrace of the concept. And then in the last year, I relaunched, my company has gone with, to the Society of Women Engineers with this vision for the STEM reentry task force. So we now co-lead with the Society of Women Engineers a task force of 7 engineering-based companies that are piloting reentry internship programs for returning engineers in the 2016 year. And those companies are IBM, General Motors, Booz Allen Hamilton, Intel, Cummins, Caterpillar, and Johnson Controls. And 5 of those programs have announced already. 2 of them have yet to announce. And if you go to reentry.swe.org, reentry.swe.org, you will go onto a landing page where you can see information about all of those programs, because we're actually launching those as a group. Those companies are the inaugural members of this task force, and we will repeat that initiative next year with new companies. So we see companies in those 2 fields. There's also a group of companies that were under the umbrella of the company Return Path, and it's now set up as a nonprofit called Path Forward, and they have a group of companies that were based in Colorado that piloted a 20-week re-entry internship program. And then there's the On-Ramp Fellowship, which runs a 1-year part training, part work, internship-like experience for lawyers returning to big firm law. So that's another one to check out that's expanding at an incredible rate. And then if you're in the UK, Women Returners runs a number of initiatives with companies in the UK that are using reentry internships. And then also in the UK, there's the Daphne Jackson Fellowships for people who are in scientific research careers and have been away from the lab bench. And interestingly, you know, anyone who's in that field will probably have heard, you're toast if you've been away for more than 6 months. So these are 2-year internships that are scientific research lab-based fellowships, and we've seen people go back into research and tenure-track academia and industry through that program as well. So there's some really interesting initiatives out there. And I also want to add to people who are in technical fields, one of the reasons we established the STEM Reentry Task Force with the Society of Women Engineers is because we wanted that engineers to know who might have thought, there's no way I could ever return, I've been out too long, that not only can you return, but these companies are establishing a formal pathway back for you with these programs with cohorts and support and updating. Wait, actually, let me just say one more thing about the technical relaunch. Sorry, let me just say one more thing about the technical relaunch, because let's say you're returning to a technical field without the benefit of a reentry internship program. I have a great success story of a manufacturing engineer who was out for 11 years, who came back, wanted to come back into quality engineering. Notice when she looked at all of the job descriptions that every single one of them required either Six Sigma or Lean certification. So she actually had to go back and get that she ended up getting lean certified to even be viable as a candidate to apply for these programs. So there's that extra layer with certain technical or scientific relaunches where you might have to go back and get some sort of a certification or some sort of a special degree, not necessarily an entirely new degree, but some designation or updating in order to be a viable candidate.
Compensation comes up a lot when people are returning to the workforce. Is there anything that people should keep in mind regarding compensation, particularly after they're returning to the workforce after years away from it?
Okay, so we talked earlier about trading compensation for control, you know, if you want to take less money to get a certain schedule that you want. But usually a lot of the compensation questions come out around the topic of, I have to fill out these online applications and they're asking me for my prior compensation, and either am I going to price myself out of the job because I was making a lot of money before my career break, I'm willing to take less now, but I don't want to be dismissed because the numbers are too high, or I was making a certain amount of money, but that was years ago, and I actually think I should be making more now. So you know, if you have any questions about whether there's going to be a problem with your pre-career break salary one way or the other, the salary negotiators that we've talked to say to put on that online form 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So they're going to know that that's not what you actually made, but it's going to force them into a conversation with you. And that also is the other reason why it's so important to have a personal handoff, that this online application and filling out this piece is really almost a formality, but the real action in terms of you getting an opportunity to have an interview or, you know, more conversations that will lead to the job opportunity is going to be because you met someone who knows someone, or who is literally going to walk your printed resume over to the hiring manager or to the recruiter. Because I can tell you, we speak with employers frequently, and they will say, it absolutely makes a difference when someone walks a resume over to them. It brings it to the top of the pile, because lots of times they'll just have hundreds or sometimes thousands of resumes, and they can't even process them all. So if there's an employee recommendation of one kind or another, even if it's a friend of a friend, then that is an automatic way for you to get more attention.
And I cannot echo that advice strongly enough. When I'm hiring people, we have a very archaic system, and to even access a resume is probably 7 or 8 clicks just to access it, and then I've got to click back out again. And so when I'm looking to hire someone, I went through a whole page of 20 resumes. I was so tired, it took 25 minutes. I stopped going through the rest of them. You know, we probably had 300 resumes. I probably stopped at number 40. And at that point I said, look, here's 2 or 3 candidates I'm going to interview. I never even looked at resumes 41 to 300. And anyone who got my email was referred in generally had a conversation. So I cannot echo that strongly enough. Technology has made it very easy for companies to list jobs and makes it very easy for people to apply for jobs. And networking is even so much more critical today than it ever was as a result of that.
Right, and let me just chime in one more point about it. So for people who were in a situation where they were making a lot of money before, and they're perfectly happy to take a job where they understand that the salary range is in a completely different range from what they were making before, they should be prepared when the interviewer asks them, well, what were you making before, to say, you know, it was years ago and I don't think it's relevant. What I'm really focused on is what the salary range is now. I've done some research. I'm curious what your range is here, because of course negotiators will tell you to get them to try and say the first number. But you know, they might say, you know, I'm guessing what you made, you know, in your XYZ job was like much higher than what we're offering here, and you say, I understand. I intentionally sought this job out. I'm really intrigued with it. This is why I think I'm great for it. And I understand the salary range is different from what my pre-career break experience was, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that.
We've been getting a lot of questions from alumni coming in. So first of all, I want to thank you for sending in your questions, and please continue to send them in. We will try to get to as many as possible. This question actually came in from several people. What is the best way to explain to prospective employers about a career break due to a lengthy illness?
That's a great question because people are worried. First, from a privacy standpoint, do I have to tell these people who I don't even know everything about my personal situation? So I have to qualify this answer. I am talking about the answer where you suffered from an illness, but you are now completely recovered and are functioning at the same level that you were functioning at pre-career break. Because if you have not completely recovered and you are facing an ongoing disability that limits or changes your level of performance versus what you did in the past, there's a whole separate body of knowledge of subject matter experts on conversations when you have a disability that are separate from what I'm going to address. So I'm going to address when you've gone through a personal interest and personal health issue, and now you're fully recovered, and you're asked about why you took a career break. So remember, you need to give information that is relevant to that employer. And what's relevant as far as they're concerned is that you're performing at a level that is equivalent to what you experienced before. So you can say, I took a career break for a family health issue, which is now resolved, and now I can't wait to get back to work. Because that allows you not to have to go into personal details that could be a violation of certain rules for you to have to even divulge, and also are not even relevant to the employer in terms of can you do the work. And it also prevents you from the tendency of giving out too much information where you really do not need to do that. Now that answer, you notice, also works for the person who is in an elder care situation. And I think the words "which is now resolved" are really, really important words to have in that conversation, because, you know, if you were in an elder care role and, you know, your family made a decision that your mother-in-law is now going to go in the board and care, so you're not like their day-to-day point person, you don't want the employer to be concerned for that reason, or if you had a personal health issue, that there's something that's going to come up again and that's going to compromise your performance. So you want to make sure that you use that language.
And I would agree as well that that language is relevant even for people who are parents, where you might say, you know, my kids are older now, they're in school, they don't need the same level of care, so we're all covered in terms of that, and I'm really eager to re-enter because of the intellectual challenge and joining the company.
Yeah, it's important to mention that because companies are really not allowed, or employers are not really allowed to ask you. So if you want to volunteer, it's not important, but if you choose to volunteer that, you're making the point that I've got it all covered at home, and it's not going to affect my work performance. That's the standard by which you have to decide how you're going to answer these questions, whether it's a personal health issue, elder care, or child care issue.
And to your point, I think it's brief, I think it's head-on, and to your point, it's everything's covered, we're good, and then you're focusing on the job at hand. How would your advice change in terms of re-entering for someone looking to create a business after a break rather than join an existing company?
Okay, so again, there are some really great resources on there about entrepreneurship and starting companies, but the one thing that I talk to that's relevant for relaunchers is if you're starting a company, are you prepared for years of no income or for years of lumpy, unpredictable income? Because that's a reality when you're starting a business. If your financial situation allows for you to have a long period without income or lumpy, unpredictable income, and you're passionate and interested in starting your own business, then I would say yes, go ahead and explore some of the other resources that you have that to talk about, you know, how you start a business and you know, step by step in terms of creating it. But I would really pay attention to that income stream question first and foremost.
Carol, one of the questions that's come up a lot, and we talked about, you know, what do you say to employers or to people you're networking with on the outside when you're re-entering? Let's say you were a stay-at-home parent and had taken care of children and family, and now you're re-entering. How do you reorient them to your changing identity, that you're now seeking a different role? How do you kind of prepare your family for something like that and carve out space as well?
So of course that answer depends on how old your kids are. And, you know, if you have really little kids, you might want to do something even as basic as, you know, how you help them pack their backpack every day. Well, they're going to help you pack your work bag for the first day. And whatever they say to put in it, just put in it and don't ask any questions. But to get them sort of involved and invested, and for older kids or school-age kids, you might want to take a picture of your workplace and even make a chart and have a picture of your workplace, a picture of their schools, and even maybe bring them to your workplace. So it's not a mystery about where you are going every day. They can visualize in their head, oh yes, mom or dad is at work and that's what it looks like. And you can even have a chart, and at the end of the day, right, each person writes something about their day, and that's the beginning of your dinner conversation. Also, when you're in the early stages, bring them into the process so they're invested alongside you as you go through it. Say, I just made a list of the top 10 things that I think I'm best at. Do you agree? Or look at this job description if you have an older kid. What do you think? Do you think that's something that might be an interesting job or an interesting job for me? And also be really honest with them when you get rejected. All of us, you know, get rejected at different parts of the process, and there's a whole discussion around how you deal with rejection. Actually, I should say, go to irelaunch.com and look at our blog. We recently had one of our coaches wrote how to deal with rejection during a relaunch. So that's a resource for you. But, you know, let them know that you're upset, and let them see that you suffered a defeat. It will also be role modeling for them when they have disappointments. I also wanted to just extend this answer to talk about the issue of men who are relaunching, and do we need to tweak any of what we've been talking today, of the strategies that we've been talking about today, if it's a man who is going through this process, especially after a childcare role, as opposed to a woman. So I would say actually no in terms of the strategies. The strategies are really equally effective for men and women, but I'll give you the example of a man, his name is Dave Carty. He's one of our success stories that we feature on our website. He was an international business development manager for Best Foods, which is now part of Unilever. He took a 13-year career break to care for his 3 kids. He not only relaunched, but he career transitioned and ended up in a strategy role for a K-12 independent school. And he said when he was having interviews with employers, he could tell when he was having conversations with certain interviewers who were just not getting who he was, and they were not comfortable with the idea that he was a stay-at-home dad. And you know, we're not over that yet, and it's really hiring manager by hiring manager in terms of how receptive people are in general to people returning from career break, and especially men who are going through that process. So he said that he would select out those employers who he felt didn't really get him and have more conversations until he was starting to have the conversations of people who respected his decision, understood where he was coming from, and that was one of the situations that he ended up choosing to go back to work.
So we've got one last question. We're just about coming to the top of the hour, so we'll probably make this a little quick before we wrap up. How would you recommend leveraging social media, particularly something like LinkedIn, for people who are reentering? And it's probably going to have to be like a 60-second answer.
Okay. So LinkedIn is great, as I said, for locating all those people from the past and using it as a way to have that initial information gathering email when you ask them for that phone call. So that's really important. There is a way that you can sort on LinkedIn by looking for all the graduates from your alma mater who are working at certain employers, and then you can find other Harvard grads who you can talk to who will probably want to talk to you because you are also a Harvard grad. And then let me just put in an example using Twitter. So if you look at, sign up for twitter.com, you put in a name, email, password, you've got an account. Go to company Twitter pages. There might be more than one. Find something of interest to you, click through, read it. Then when you're talking to someone at the company, say, oh, I was on your Twitter page and I saw the XYZ report and I clicked through and I read it and this is what I thought. That is going to be very impressive to them on 2 levels. One, You're using social media. If there's an ageism issue, again, you're just happen to be on their Twitter site, so signaling in that way. The other thing is I do really deep research. I didn't just look at your website. I looked at how you were portrayed on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, and this is what I found out. And that's going to make you a much more informed interviewee and also more impressive to them because of the time you spent researching who they were.
Carol, thank you. This has been fantastic. I want to turn it back over to Anne as we're just getting ready to wrap up.
Thank you, Matthew and Carol. This has been a great webinar today. We're still getting many questions. I want to encourage everyone to visit the iRelaunch website at irelaunch.com and learn more about reentering the workforce. And I want to thank you all online for joining us and hope that you'll take a moment to complete a brief survey when you log off. We appreciate the feedback. And as a final reminder, this webinar will be available on the Harvard Alumni Association's website next week. The website address is alumni.harvard.edu/HAA. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.